Hello and welcome to Leadership That Liberates. It has been a minute. We are back after a month-long break. I took the month of August off to focus on some other things. And wow, it was really nice. Honestly, it was really nice to have the time and space away from the podcast. It also really helped me understand more about what I want this space to be about and how I really want to approach the topics of conversation that I want to explore with you. And so it was just really useful and productive and restorative to take some time away. And it felt really important. And I've also been thinking about how am I going to make this process more sustainable for myself in the future, which probably won't be implemented until next year. But yeah, it's been so nice. Honestly, it's been so nice just to take a step back from this. And I'm also really excited to be back with you and to be sharing on this week's topic, which is shaming, policing, and cancel culture, particularly in the online space. And, this is really a phenomena that's kind of blown up in the last 5 years, particularly following 2020 and sort of our mass quote unquote awakening around racial injustice. And cancel culture, though, and call out culture, that has existed for many years. But the way that it has come into the online space just creates a whole host of very unique and problematic dynamics, challenges, outcomes. And it's something that has played a very significant role in my own relationship to social media and why I really don't like it anymore. And I have touched on that in a couple of different episodes, and I'll go into it in more depth. But really, this phenomena is done with the intention or the purpose of holding people accountable for harm. And in essence, forcing people to take responsibility for harm that they've caused. But this is done in such a demoralizing, dehumanizing, destructive way that there is no part of me that supports any part of this. And it feels really important to talk about, especially in the context of leadership and liberation, because it is so counter in every way to liberatory practice, to liberatory visions of the future. It is so against liberation itself, and yet it is a practice that is common among the left or progressives or people who supposedly are here to create a liberated world and a liberated future for all of us. But in so many ways, this phenomena of online shaming and policing and cancellation is a regurgitation of the oppressive dynamics of white supremacy, of capitalism, of neocolonialism. I want to explore that because it feels important that we really think about the approaches that we take and the ways that we behave, and to what extent are we recreating the very things that we're saying we're against. So holding someone accountable for harm they've caused in a way that destroys them, it doesn't make sense to me. And I think it's important or useful maybe to start with talking about shame itself. And if you have been listening to any of my previous episodes, you probably already have a sense that shame is a very central part of my work, and that I believe shame is really at the root of our self-suppression and systems of oppression. It is really because of shame that we become fragmented, that there are parts of ourselves we deny or disown or reject, that we push into the shadow. That happens because of shame. And the shame we feel is an internalization of the norms and values of oppressive systems. And so because we don't really fit into the systems in the ways that we're supposed to, because hello, they're like unnatural to humanity. We don't really fit into the boxes that have been drawn around us. And in every time we step outside of that box, we experience some degree of shame. And that shame leads us to suppress and repress parts of ourselves. And it's because of that disconnection from who we really are that we then behave and act in harmful, oppressive, violent ways. And so for me, shame is at the center of the biggest problems in our world. Why people think that using shame as a tool for reform is useful is beyond me, right? Like it just does not make sense to me. And shame in and of itself is not a bad thing. It's actually, it serves a purpose, right? Evolutionarily, shame served a purpose. The purpose of shame was to temporarily immobilize us, to kind of put us in a temporary state of freeze. So we could take a moment to reflect on, like, oh, wait, what have I done? What did I say? Did I hurt somebody? The intention of shame is for us to experience true connection in relationship, and it is to repair harm, it is to restore intimacy. But what happens, especially because shame has been weaponized within our culture, and because the ways in which we experience it are so distorted, that it doesn't actually, for the most part, in most cases, benefit us personally or relationally, but rather it leads to collapse. The freeze is not temporary. It becomes almost like a permanent state of being where we're just living in fear and moving from fear and acting with fear. And we don't actually know how to come back from the experience of shame, because the ways in which it happens is often so dehumanizing that we get stuck in these loops of like what terrible bad people we are. And privilege and shame go hand in hand because we so often, especially when people find out about their own privilege or they come to an awareness of how their privilege in essence harms and oppresses other people without the same privilege. There is a degree to which we can feel guilt about that, which guilt can be a manifestation of healthy shame. But what so often happens is that we experience toxic shame, which is that rather than believing that we have done something bad, we take on the belief that we are bad, that we are inherently bad. And so shame then actually immobilizes us in a more permanent and destructive way than it would if it was actually serving its evolutionary intention. And when we are in this kind of shame, especially around privilege, and I'm bringing up privilege specifically because that is what people are attacking in the online space for the most part. It is harm that is caused from a place of privilege, harm that is caused through the dynamics of white supremacy and through whiteness. There are many layers to this because actually, like, online shaming and policing and cancel culture is like rampant within the queer community, especially. So it's not only about having a marginalized identity versus a privileged identity, or being white versus being a person of color. It's not like it's relegated to one or the other. It is definitely a process that affects both quote unquote sides, let's say, which I don't like that. I don't like the way that we create this kind of separation, even though in some cases it does serve a purpose to do that, especially when we want to talk about oppressive dynamics. And at the same time, we so often are reinforcing the division between us rather than finding ways to really understand our collective shared experience of oppression, because to different extents we're all oppressed under these systems because of the ways especially in which we've internalized them. And so even those people who oppress others themselves have experienced some type of oppression, and that could really be through traumatic experiences that have shaped them. I mean, the people who cause harm, I just heard this weekend this quote, and I wish I could remember who it was from, but I don't. But it was basically along the lines that, like, the first time a person commits harm is not the first time they've experienced harm. That's not their first encounter with harm, because in order to commit harm, we must first be harmed. And so, what very often happens, especially for people who are experiencing shame surrounding privilege, is that they will either jump into that kind of saviorism that we've talked about recently, and they'll want to like save people and fix the problem, inserting and imposing themselves in ways that actually then create more harm, or the person will just collapse into freeze and abdicate all power altogether and remove themselves from liberation work. They'll just remove themselves. And this is, I had shared in, I think, episode 3 about how this played out for me and how there was a period of time in which I was like, oh, who am I to say what liberation looks like? Who am I to say how this should happen? I don't have a role. It's not my place. And so I totally removed myself from the world that I actually felt so passionate about. And so much of that process for me was directly related to online experiences and to the dynamics in the online space that were just so off-putting to me. And the ways in which I internalized the problematic dynamics playing out was that I very much took this on and I totally gave up my power to play a role in liberation. And that's not helpful. That's not useful. This is kind of how shame is operating. So, again, for us to use shame as a way to correct is just like very counter to what liberation is actually about. I want to share a little bit about social media for me. I just feel like the more and more time that passes, the less and less I like it or have any desire to be on it in any way. And I do really see a lot of value in it as well because I know people from all over the world and it really helps me to keep up with them, to stay connected to what's going on in their lives to some extent. And it's been a really meaningful way to meet people who are like-minded, who are like-hearted, who have the same values, who are doing similar work, collaborations. Like it's been very fruitful for that. But aside from that, I don't really see a lot of value in it for me, myself personally. And pretty much the only reason I'm on it at all is because I'm self-employed and I'm an entrepreneur and I have to sell my services. And it feels as though that is an important part of that process. Although there are ways that, can go back to more traditional old school marketing, and I've been trying to do some of that because I really just would prefer to remove myself from the online space. I used to have such a different relationship with social media. I loved it. Like I really need to like lock my Facebook profile because there's so much on there, but it's like my Facebook has like dozens and dozens of photo albums from across the years. I really loved at one point to be on social media and to share my life and to connect with people over my experiences that I was sharing there. And it's just like post 2020, I don't like it. I don't like it. I just feel like it's become such a divisive space. And I shared a couple of episodes ago, I was talking about how, I found especially for my social media and the types of people I was connected to and how different they are in worldviews and values and perspectives, that it felt especially divisive. When I listened back to it, it almost sounded as though I was saying that my social media community or presence is divisive because people don't agree with me. And that's not true. Like, I don't expect people to agree with me. And in fact, I know like there are so many people in my online space that don't agree with the things that I say or the perspectives that I take. And in fact, there's so many people who choose to step away and disengage from my social media just for the very fact that I even talk about the things that I do. Like, for them, that's enough to not want to consume my content. It doesn't actually matter what my opinion is on the thing. The fact that I'm talking about it is enough for them to want to disconnect. And it was interesting because I was having this conversation with someone recently that I met on LinkedIn, and she was like, wow, your work is so incredibly important and so inherently divisive. And like, I'm doing this work about repairing kind of this division between us by addressing the disconnect within us. There is an inherent divisiveness to this work, even though my intention is to focus on love and compassion and shared humanity. Wow, like the fact that that is divisive, but it is. It is divisive. So I know that just by me being me, just by existing, I am contributing to this divisiveness to some degree. I already know that. But when I say that my social media is divisive, I think it's more, and maybe not, and not even in the present because I'm like not even really using it very much. But I think it had become that way, again, related to some things I had shared around the fact that like I can't communicate or connect with people in person and have a face-to-face conversation. And I think that is part of why the internet has become so divisive and why social media and this culture of shaming and policing and canceling and calling out is so pervasive. It's because we can't be face to face. It's because we can't have a conversation. It's because it makes it easier for people to kind of hide in the anonymity of their own home behind their screen. It's so funny because it's like we're attacking people to take accountability. But part of the reason that we're doing it in the way that we're doing it is because it absolves us of accountability and responsibility. And there is some sort of ease by which we can attack another person when we don't have to look at them, when we don't have to see the pain that we're causing, when we don't have to bear witness to the destruction that our dehumanizing, demoralizing language and actions have on other people. It is so easy to hide behind our screens. And there's also this kind of like mob mentality that happens within this like cancellation culture and this online shaming that happens where it's like, oh, let's band together. There's some aspect of belonging that we're trying to have met through ganging up on other people and bullying them together. There is something about us that likes to be the oppressor, that likes to be the one putting other people down. There is something within us that desires to play that role in that dynamic. And I think that has a lot to do with the ways in which we have internalized these systems, right? So participate in this mob mentality, this group think, we're bonding over bullying, this distorted way to create some false sense of belonging and acceptance. And we're really enacting or perpetuating colonialism through cancel culture because cancel culture is a mirror of the harmful impact of colonialism and our disconnection from self and from each other and from land, from nature, from wisdom, from tradition. And so basically, what we're doing is we are contributing to the fragmentation of a person. And these systems already fragment us enough. This is why we have the shadow. This is why we suppress parts of ourselves because of shame. And when we are engaging with a person not as a whole, full person with humanity and engaging with the complexity and nuance of their lived experience, but we're like, you did this one thing, and forever you will carry this scarlet letter. You will be banned, you will be banished. There is very much, right, like this exile and this disposability, like people are just disposable. That's a colonial, neo-colonial perspective of exile and excommunication, disposability. When we're so entrenched in extraction and exploitation, it is very easy to see people through that lens as well, even if we're against all of those things. As how is it, again, that the left, that progressives, that people who are supposedly fighting for liberation, who are advocating for equity and justice and fairness, how is it that those people can then want to exile and excommunicate someone without taking the fullness of their humanity and lived experience into account? It's because of the ways in which we have internalized these systems to the extent that we're not aware of how deeply we have been touched and impacted by the paradigms that we live in. And so in this process of cancellation, this person isn't worthy anymore. They're not worthy of social connection. They're not worthy of employment. They're not worthy of having their basic needs met. This is literally what cancellation leads to. It's the decimation of a person's life. And we are calling this liberation work. And of course, it's this very punitive, punish-based way of relating to each other. There's no space in this for relationship or repair, restoration, or reconciliation. In pre-colonial Europe, how were people held accountable? How were people punished? Through public shaming, through public killing. And so these practices that were normal in pre-colonial Europe have become a part of our norm within society because those same values and principles and practices shaped white supremacy. And so in our current Western colonial context, justice equals punishment. That's why we have such a huge emphasis on the prison system, the prison complex. And it's so interesting that socially and collectively, we want to divest from prisons. We want to remove that system. And yet we are replicating it. Why does it need to exist if we're going to police and punish and exile each other? There's no need to have a system to do that if we're doing it. I want to share a quote by Kai Cheng Tom, somebody that I adore and admire and respect so much, and whose work overlaps with my own in so many beautiful ways. And I have been meaning to reach out to her, but I haven't yet. But she talks a lot about cancel culture and has written about it, has done interviews about it. And I just love her approach and her perspective on so many things, but especially around this topic. And this quote, I think, that she has shared in the past is really important. And she says, if we are truly against police and prison culture, we have a collective responsibility to create skill and structure around justice seeking without collapsing into victim survivor blaming or vigilante violence. So if we really are against this kind of system and this kind of process of punitive punishment and policing, then it is up to us. It is our responsibility to develop the skills to seek justice without replicating systems of harm, without pointing fingers and creating division, without being violent. Because again, it's like the consequences that people face for being canceled are so dire. And especially when this is happening to folks who are already marginalized, and then you put them in a position to have what resources they do have access to be taken away from them, that's so problematic. And I think that this disposability and this exile and this excommunication in so many ways, again, is this reflection of white supremacy, of colonialism, of capitalism. We want things to be fast and easy and quick and efficient. And so let's just dispose of a person because repair and reconciliation, that takes time and that requires space and that requires relationship and that requires courage on both parts. Because one of the reasons why it's so easy to hide behind our screens and engage in mob mentality behavior is because it's a cowardly way to move through the world. You don't have to be brave to attack someone online. You don't have to be brave to point fingers. You don't have to be brave to blame. What is brave is to take accountability and responsibility. So the person who creates harm has to be very courageous in order to admit that and to take some kind of accountability. But also, the people who are upset about the harm being caused are called into courage as well. It is easy to dispose of a person, but it requires courage to be in relationship with them, to hold them accountable, to still offer care and compassion. And not everybody is required to do that, right? There are cases in which a person who has caused harm and is harmful, somebody who has been a victim to their harm, to their abuse, to violence, is not obligated to courageously confront them. But that is a responsibility of us collectively. We can't replicate and recreate oppressive systems and expect that we're going to create a liberated future. There's kind of been this distinguishing that's happened between call ins and call outs. And call out culture and cancel culture, for the most part, synonymous with one another. And so, call out culture, which is essentially cancellation, is really focused on denouncing a person publicly and publicly humiliating and shaming them and pointing to how and why they're harmful, and then creating this whole campaign around their cancellation and why they should no longer have opportunities, why their place of employment should no longer allow them to work there, why the people in their lives should disconnect and disassociate from them. Whereas call in culture is more focused on how do we engage in some kind of relationship with the person who has caused harm? How do we call them in rather than call them out? Why don't we have conversation? Why don't we make those attempts at repair and reconciliation? Why don't we collectively seek to humanize them and acknowledge their humanity? That this harm that they have caused is a part of their humanity. And so much of this, I think, is about also just realizing and accepting that each and every one of us are capable of things that we don't believe we're capable of. And we like to think that we're better or above people who are causing harm or people who are behaving in oppressive ways. But again, if we are meeting that behavior with more of the same behavior, how exactly is it? Like those things don't cancel each other out. We don't put hate with more hate and expect there to be less hate. The hate will grow and it will amplify. So if we are meeting harmful dehumanization with harmful dehumanization, we only create more harmful dehumanization. And I think that there are cases and instances in which call outs are effective when we're calling out large institutions, large companies that are on a mass scale extracting and exploiting and causing harm to the masses, and who aren't actually going to be destroyed forever if we divest and we stop investing in their company and their institution. That's so very different from calling out and canceling an individual who is vulnerable because of the systems we live in. And if we believe that people who cause harm deserve to have their lives decimated, then I think that's something we need to examine within our own hearts, because that stems from a place of hate, regardless of how we self-identify, regardless of how we perceive ourselves, regardless of our self-concept of how progressive or compassionate or fair we are. If we believe that a person deserves to be dehumanized and demoralized and exiled and excommunicated from society, that is something we have to examine within ourselves, because it is an internalization of the systems that we live within. We have to be willing to take accountability and responsibility for ourselves as well, and to say, these are my values, and this is the world that I'm fighting for. And how does that require me to show up in the world and to relate to other people? And again, it doesn't mean that we need to be like in intimate relationships with abusers and people who cause harm, but we are never going to break these cycles and create this possibility for collective healing if we are using the same tools against people that have been used against us collectively. And so I would just invite us to reflect on, what is it within me that desires vengeance? What is it within me that feels so comfortable with the binary of abuser and survivor, oppressor and oppressed, perpetrator and victim? What is it within me that needs there to be the binary, and for me to be on the good side of it, and for somebody else to be on the bad side of it? What is it within me that desires to see someone exiled and excommunicated? I think the parts of us that support those kinds of behaviors or those kind of dynamics or ways of seeing the world or moving through the world, those parts of us are hurt and wounded, and they're rooted in our own pain and our own trauma. And so it's worth examining those parts of ourselves and asking ourselves, what is it that this part of me really needs? Because it's not actually the destruction of someone's life or their character. There is a deeper need longing to be met. And that need is never actually going to be met by hurting someone else, even if they've caused hurt. That deeper need within us is never going to be satiated or fulfilled by recreating more violence. And so, where do these parts of us come from? And what are they asking for? Maybe it's as simple as they want to be seen and acknowledged by us. Maybe that's all, maybe that's enough. But the parts of us that revel in the pain of others, those are parts of our shadow. Those are parts of us in pain that have not yet been met with compassion. And if we are not meeting ourselves and all of our parts with compassion, of course, how could we ever fully meet anyone else in that way? Fully. And so I understand that it can be tempting to engage in these kind of dynamics because, again, it does create this false sense of safety and of belonging with our quote unquote group. And part of the reason that my relationship to social media has shifted so much is because I've been able to see the ways in which I take part in shaming. And it's subtle, but it's still real. And that's part of why I almost don't even want to talk about social issues at all on my social media, is because I know that shadow part of myself. I know there's a part of me that will engage in harm. And that's a part of me, I think, that wants to be validated and accepted in so many ways. And so, what are the parts of ourselves that are asking to be seen and met with compassion so that we can see and meet others with compassion more fully, more wholeheartedly from our souls, from our hearts, from our spirits? And let's just continue to think about the ways that we can actually cultivate connection with each other rather than defaulting to what is quick, easy, and efficient. Because as humans, we don't deserve to be dealt with in quick, easy, efficient ways. We deserve to give each other the time and space that repair and restoration and reconciliation requires.